But I mean, you have this breakdown from your analysis, having looked at this approved reallocation of 150,000 polling units nationwide by INEC, and you did it based on highlighting different criteria. Because amidst people saying, look, they're crying wolf, INEC says, no, you're crying wolf where there's none. But I see you talked about political parties, you talked about the region. Take us through this. What's your findings?
What you'll find out is because INEC is trying to satisfy all parties, it's like a laboratory experiment. Proportionality mixed with equality is similar to when you try and mate, and allow me to use this analogy, when you try and mate a cow and a dog. If you had all it happens, what you give birth to is a monster. And that is why if you look at how the 119,000 polling units were distributed before, Borno State was ranked in terms of polling unit concentration across the country. Borno State was ranked number 9th. What you will expect is, even if everything between the previous database and now remain stable in some of these states, especially in Borno, the concentration of polling units in Borno will be the same. So previously, Borno State had about 3.3% of polling units. Prior to this additional polling units INEC is introducing. Right now, Borno State not only has a higher concentration of polling units, Borno State has moved up the ladder of polling units across the country. So one of the reasons this has happened is because of the dangerous cocktail of trying to mix proportionality and equality. However, the good news here is if you look at the distribution of polling units across party bases, you will find out that INEC has actually been fair in its distribution across party bases. So for example, if you look at all APC parties prior to this new polling unit allocation, all APC parties prior to that had 38% of polling units. Right now, APC parties have lost about 1%, but we could always argue, or easily argue, that moving from 38% to 37% doesn't show that INEC had any intention or strong intention to maneuver the number of polling units across party structures. So you have currently 37% of polling units in APC governed states as compared to 38%. A bit of a decline, but not too much of a significant decline. If you look at as well as polling units in PDP governed states, that was about 55% before the introduction of new polling units. Right now, that has also inched up by about 1% to 56%. So on a political party basis, it's going to be extremely hard for a political party to feel that INEC has victimized that party.
Because it's 1%.
Because it's 1%. It's though it could be viewed as significant, it doesn't show any strong intention to sway votes along party lines. The challenge we had previously was, how does INEC manage its distribution of polling units based on the measure of proportionality and equality? But across political parties, there hasn't been evidence. The narration shows that there hasn't been evidence of political games. However, there's a bigger challenge. And the challenge is, if you look at the distribution of polling units across regions, especially if you look at distribution of polling units from a northern and southern region perspective, that's where most negative comments that are hitting INEC are coming from, even though across political parties we see a balanced view. What we have is across the region, all the three northern regions, that's North Central, Northeast, and Northwest, prior to this new polling unit arrangement, held 52% of all polling units. After this new allocation, the northern region presently holds 57% of polling units. So we've seen what we can term a significant increase in polling units within the northern region. Again, recall the distribution of polling units across political parties. We said we didn't see any significant change. So we had APC governed states holding previously about 35%, 36%. That dropped to about 35%. Same thing, a 1% change in polling units that were held across PDP governed states. But what we have is a much significant change if you look at it from a northern and southern region perspective. And that's why you will feel that there seems to be more explanation that needs to come out on why there's a significant jump of 52% concentration of polling units in the north to 57% that it is as at today. And clearly what it simply means is if there's an increase in concentration of polling units in the north, automatically there's a decrease in polling units across the south. If you look at even the breakdown further, you will discover that there's a gain in polling unit concentration in the northeast, north central, and northwest. If you look at the southern region, there's a decline across the south-south, the southeast, and the southwest. That is where one of the main challenges INEC has. So on a political party basis, yes, there seems to be some level of equity. But on the regional basis, okay, the discussion needs to go further.
You know, Jide, I'm trying to look at this. I've been looking at it, you know, from your explanation and also the example of 5 children, 5 oranges. Yes, because we're saying that this, listening to the INEC chairman, it says this is supposed to favor the voters more. If we're looking at it in terms of voting population and voter access to polling units, ideally, shouldn't we be talking about or sharing this in terms of proportionality? Will we be in trouble if we did that?
If we did that, let's go very specific here. The INEC voter database has 70,483,000 plus numbers. So let's just make it easy and say 71 million voters on its database. If we were to allocate it strictly based on proportionality, what INEC will do is to take each state's database, look at the total database, and find out the share of voters across all the 36 states, including Abuja. Once you find that percentage, you have 2 options. It's either you apply that percentage on the new 30,000 polling units, or you say to yourself, we want to have 150,000 polling units. So apply that percentage on the new number.
Do we just come up and say we want to have 150,000 polling units, or the voting population determines how many polling units we should have?
Ordinarily, there are a lot of factors that we should consider in determining how many polling units. One is the number of voters across each state. But even a more significant, maybe a more significant way is to look at the proximity of the polling units to the voter. Because what really happens is the proximity of the polling unit to the voter significantly influences the willingness of the potential voter to come out to vote. So even though you could have a distribution based on proportionality, proportionality does not necessarily mean each polling unit will have the same equal distance to the house of the voter. If you want to understand how easy it is for the voter to get to the polling unit, you will have to look at the land area of each state and the number of polling units that have been allocated to each state, which we'll also get to in the course of this discussion, which we've also done. Now, with that, we'll be able to easily find out how easy it is for the voter to get to his polling units.
So you're saying that land mass must also have been taken into consideration in the creation of polling units. Is that what you're saying?
Land mass should, and I'll explain why. Land mass should, but as we have today, land mass hasn't. If you look at Lagos State, because of the structure of the state, about 3,600 square kilometers, if my numbers are right. Lagos State is the easiest place to get to your polling units. In fact, based on the numbers, there's a polling unit per 333 square meter in the state. So you have ease of access to a polling unit, which, because of the proximity of the polling unit, increases the willingness of the voter to come out on election day to vote. Take a state like Taraba. For every step, to make the analysis simple, for every step you take to get to a polling unit in Lagos, the man in Taraba has to take 63 steps. because of the sheer nature of the land mass of the state. So to get to your polling unit in Lagos, if you have to take one step, the man in Taraba has to take 63 steps.
And here we see that the allocation of the new polling units by states, Lagos has about 11,023. And then Taraba's got about 2,673.
Exactly. But Taraba is significantly bigger than Lagos.
No, but if we're going to talk about using landmass, isn't that going to be chaotic and very, very controversial? Because you're looking at something that they say they're based on the voting population and not necessarily landmass.
Well, like we've talked about in this couple of minutes, if you're going to use voting population, are you going to strictly stick to the share of voters on the database? Are you going to
which is what they used.
Which is part of what they used. They also use some equality. The view of the landmass is more of the strategic view. So, for example, in APC-governed states as at today, if you look at the distribution of polling units, the landmass of APC states, and the current number, the proposed number of polling units, it will be easier for an electorate to get to a polling unit in an APC-governed state than an electorate getting to a polling unit in a PDP-governed state. So on a strategic perspective, what you will most likely find is a higher turnout of voters in these states that have polling units in close proximity to people's homes than in those states that have their polling units much further away from the voters, which could significantly influence not just the turnout of voters, because in most times what you find is once you make voters have any reason not to come out to vote, it also influences the results of the vote.